Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bite Size Balance. I have a little announcement before we get started with today's episode. I've got a great guest for you today. Amy Risley is the founder and CEO of an incredibly successful skincare company called Skinfix, and her story of her own personal burnout, her recovery from that, and the lessons that she's learned along the way when it comes to managing and growing a very successful company and also parenting her two now teenage kids. I think you're going to find those lessons to be really, really helpful and her honesty to be very refreshing. So that podcast episode is coming up. But before we get to that, I wanted to say a special thank you to those of you who did post reviews of this podcast after my plea for those in last week's podcast. Thank you so much for doing that. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to do it yet, I just want to ask again, if you would just take a couple of minutes to go and post a review of this podcast on whatever platform it is that you listen to it on. Now, if you're going to iTunes, for example, to post a review, you're going to need to open the podcast in iTunes. So it's going to prompt you to open it again. Once you get to the podcast, go right into iTunes, and there you will see the option to leave a review. And what you can do there is provide me with a starred review and then just a couple of sentences of text, even one sentence. If you're one of those people who struggles with what to say in a review, here are a couple of ideas. You could talk about your favorite episode and why it was your favorite. You could talk about what makes Bite Size Balance different from other podcasts out there. You could talk about what you like about the types of subject matter that I deal with on this podcast, or you could leave a comment about me as a host. Again, it doesn't need to be a long, essay of a review. Just one or two sentences is perfect. The reason why these reviews matter so much is because I am trying to continue to book really interesting guests for this podcast. And I have lots of interesting women that I know in my own personal life. And I do have some connections from a professional perspective that have allowed me to interview some pretty cool guests since this podcast started. But I want to be able to keep doing that. And when I go and ask somebody if they'd be interested in being on my podcast as a guest, it's really helpful if they can see objectively that there is a real interest in this podcast and that there is an engaged audience. And those reviews really help with that. The other thing the reviews do, obviously, is they encourage other women to listen to this podcast. And I want to reach more women with the message and the topics that we're talking about on this podcast. If women go to the podcast on iTunes and they see lots of 5-star reviews and lots of comments, that makes it more likely that they're going to take a chance on an episode and maybe even subscribe to the podcast. So again, thank you to all of you who have taken the time to do that. If you haven't had a chance to do it yet, I would love it if you would do that for me. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bite Size Balance. I'm your host, Wendy McCallum, and I have a really exciting guest here today. I have Amy Risley with me. Amy is the founder and CEO of Skinfix, an incredibly successful skincare company. And I have known Amy for a long time now, and I think Amy listens to the podcast, and that's how we kind of connected over her possibly being a guest here. And she's graciously agreed. She's a really, really busy lady. I think her story around her business and just generally, building that is going to be really interesting for you to hear. I think it's so fascinating. And I love talking to women who've been successful in business, but also her personal story around doing that with 2 children in tow, and trying her best to find her balance through all of that. And I think Amy's also going to tell us a little bit about her own experience with burnout. So I think you're going to find this really fascinating. So welcome, Amy. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Wendy. It's great to be here. I love Bite Size Balance. I love everything you do and have been doing for a long time. The work you do is amazing, and you're a huge asset here in Nova Scotia, but I know you have clients globally. So we're lucky to have you here, but thank you for having me.
Thank you, Amy. I should say, Amy and I have known each other for a long time. I can't remember I think we probably met. My sister-in-law is really good friends with Amy, full disclosure. And I think that's how we originally connected. And then it kind of went from there, because when I first met you, Amy, I think you were just in the beginnings of the Skinfix adventure.
Absolutely. And I think I came to see you a couple times about the kids and diet and nutrition and all those great things, and love your cookbooks, and always been a fan. But yeah, it probably was, Wendy, I don't know, 10 years ago now
Yeah,
that we
probably. I was looking because you started Skinfix in 2012. Is that right?
uh, at the end of 2012, I bought the company. So yeah.
Yeah, and
Thanks.
I moved back to Nova Scotia in 2008, so that sounds about right, because I would have been working for a couple of years when I first met you. That's my guess, as a coach, my second life. Okay, so I did absolutely nothing in terms of giving you a great introduction, and that's because I don't think I can do it justice, and I would rather you just tell your own story around this, because I'm sure to botch it up. So I would love it if we could start by you just kind of telling everybody a little bit about how you got to be the founder and CEO of Skinfix, because you have a really interesting story before that in terms of your career. And then, I think the Skinfix story, which I've heard before, and I'm really excited to hear again, because it's been a while, is such an interesting story.
Oh, well, thank you. I think it's pretty interesting too. I can't take credit for Skinfix because I wasn't the original founder, but I discovered it and I was really lucky to. I actually, full disclosure, I'm American originally, transplanted to Canada, and now a dual citizen. Love Canada, love Nova Scotia, but I was working in the beauty industry in New York and then in London, England for the beginning part of my career for the first almost 20 years. And then got pregnant with my first baby, Izzy, who's now 17 as of Monday, and moved to Nova Scotia, where my husband was from, because London is just a very expensive place to live. And we decided to come here and have our kids. And I actually was a stay-at-home mom for probably the first 6 or 7 years of their lives, which I feel very blessed to have been able to do. I did a little bit of consulting, but really was able to just spend time with them, which is awesome. And then I met this woman who had this incredible healing balm formulation. I was introduced to her by a government agency locally, and they said, "We've met this woman. She's looking for help and funding, but we don't know anything about skincare. We hear you know about beauty. Can you meet with her?" Because I had worked for L'Oreal and Estee Lauder. And so I met with this woman, Karen Warner. And I loved the balm because it was really jam-packed with all kinds of active ingredients at a really high level. And coming from L'Oreal and Lauder, we used to, back in the day, pick one ingredient and sort of build our marketing story around it. And this thing was just loaded with pharmaceutical grade actives. But what really got me is that over the years, the family had been making this product. It was invented in 1870 in England, and they'd emigrated to Canada. The family had been making it in their kitchen for years and selling it privately. They had collected letters, literally hundreds of letters, from people who had used the balm to treat diabetic foot ulcers, lichen sclerosis, which is a form of dermatitis on the vulva, which is very hard to treat, psoriasis, all kinds of skin issues. And they pour their hearts out in these letters, because what I really hadn't fully understood until that moment is how much our mental wellness is connected to our overall health, and our skin health in particular. When you have skin issues, they can not only be uncomfortable physically, but they can be uncomfortable emotionally. These people pulled out stories, poured out their hearts, and said, basically, we've tried everything. We saw all sorts of doctors. We tried crazy modalities, and this healing balm was magic and cured my skin. And so that's where I really decided, I love beauty, but I really love the idea of being able to help people and heal their skin and do it with a product that is clean and natural. And so I mortgaged my house and bought the company, which was one formula and a great name, Skinfix, and away I went to repackage and reposition and bring the product to life.
Yeah. And you really did bring it to life. And I'm going to say this right now, because I'm going to forget. This is not a paid sponsorship. Amy and I were laughing about that because I love Skinfix. So when I met Amy, I think I went to I'm sure maybe you're still there, but your original office is in Halifax. I was there at some point, and you gave me some samples, I remember, and I brought them home, and my kids were still really little at the time. And both of them, but really my daughter in particular had some issues with like eczema and that kind of thing. And some weird rashes, with no apparent root cause. And the Skinfix balm always worked. And so I've been a believer in it since the very beginning. But you started, relatively modestly. And maybe you can just kind of talk through, because part of what I want to talk to you about today is your story with trying to balance it, balance motherhood with business and success and, trying to prevent burnout and then ending up in your own burnout. So maybe you can just sort of talk us through, like, how did you, we could probably talk about this for hours, but let's try to keep it concise. How did you get from buying that bomb to turning it into this, product that's now available, I think globally, is it?
In the US and Canada currently,
Yeah.
almost in the UK.
Oh, that's fantastic. And right now you sell the Skinfix line through Sephora, right?
Yes. Yeah, we're exclusive with Sephora and then on our own website.
Yeah. How did you get there? Like, how long did that take and what was involved in that for you?
Yeah, I mean, you and I talked about it in our sort of pre-chat before the podcast. What was involved in that was a lot of unbalance in a lot of ways. I mean, I think what I hadn't fully appreciated, and a lot of people warned me, a lot of entrepreneur friends sort of warned me, when you get into your own business, it is a completely different kettle of fish. And Wendy, because you have your own business and it is 24/7 and it is a lot of stress and a lot of weight on your shoulders, especially if you take money from outside investors, which we did. And you sort of brush it off because it's so glamorous in its ideation phase. But it's a tough slog. I mean, it's so rewarding on so many levels and so much fun and so interesting. And I feel so grateful to have this experience. On the other hand, there was a lot that I gave up from that point on in terms of my family life and my time with my kids and sort of my personal wellness. So in terms of the business, we just we repackaged it, we reformulated it so that we could scale it up into a mass manufacturing process because it had a really fiddly manufacturing process on a kitchen stove prior. And we just basically pounded the pavement and got distribution at some big retailers, initially Target in the US and Shoppers Drug Mart here. Worked tirelessly just to do what we could on the resources that we had to build awareness and drive trial. And we tried a lot of things that didn't work. And that's always very stressful because you feel like you're wasting money and it's other people's money and it's a very competitive industry. So, we just tried to just keep pushing, push through the mistakes, push through the failures, get back up and believe in what we were trying to do, which was bring a clean, clinically proven product to market that was medical grade skincare to really treat serious skin issues, but that was clean and natural. And that was sort of our raison d'etre and our beacon of light that kind of kept us pushing through. And then eventually we got on QVC in the US, and the shopping channel in Canada, which was really eye-opening because we realized when we were able to really tell our story and show our clinical results and show our before and afters and be more accessibly priced in a premium environment like QVC, that our product did really well. And that was the moment we realized it was time for us to go to Sephora, excuse me, and see if they would be interested in the brand because they have beauty editors in store who are highly educated, who really know what they're doing to really help tell that story. They have merchandising fixtures in store to really help sort of bring the brand to life, show your before and afters. And our product was expensive. It is expensive to manufacture. And so selling in Target was tough because we weren't really making enough margin to make it make sense. So we were able to pivot and enter Sephora, which was a game changer and amazing. But it took in total from the beginning to the end 5 years, which in essence isn't a really long time, but it felt like 50, I think, for the team and I. And it's been really rewarding. I've learned a lot of lessons. If I could go back and do it over, I'd do it completely differently. And I try to mentor people and sort of help them learn from my mistakes. But I think the biggest, challenge that I hadn't really contemplated going in was just how much personal sacrifice would be involved. And that's just a reality of entrepreneurship, I think, and particularly our category and our industry is really competitive, and you've just got to be on all the time. And
yeah, and I still find that story so fascinating. I just think it's incredible. I can see how you would get into that kind of how you would romanticize that whole journey. Because when you tell it, I'm thinking, oh, that sounds so exciting and so great. But I can also see as somebody who does this for, as a coach for a living around burnout and balance, I can also see how that would make it almost impossible for you to feel truly well and balanced during that. And also, to avoid burnout. And I know you said that there was great personal sacrifice, and especially in those 5 years when you were building it. But I know you also um, let me know during our pre-interview that at some point you felt yourself falling into that burnout. What did that look like for you, and when did that happen?
Um, I think there were a couple of points that I really hit burnout. One of them was right before we had the conversation with Sephora, and we were sort of deciding we're at a crossroads. It's very hard to make a product like this work at mass. It was working, but it was requiring too much of an investment to really stand out and make ourselves heard in that mass environment. And we were so premium priced compared to our direct competitors. And it was a moment where we built the business plan for Sephora before we had spoken to them, and just, found out if they actually wanted the brand. And we said, this is what it's going to take. It's going to cost us this much to exit mass. We're going to have to repackage and, start over basically. And this is what the investment's going to look like. And we were about to go to our investors to ask for more money. And it was at that moment that I thought, or we could just cut bait. I just was at such a burnout point that I thought, or, the brand is really interesting to a lot of people because it is so different and it is so targeted, and the formulas are so effective that we had a few people that wanted to buy the company at about that time and build it into a big direct to consumer brand. And they weren't sort of offering us a great deal, but there was a moment where I thought, or I could just basically sell the company and let somebody else deal with it. So that was a moment of real burnout. I remember the Christmas party that year where I stood up to give a speech to my team and I just started crying. And then I tried to make it like I was crying tears of joy and I just was exhausted. I just was like completely exhausted. And then, we were able to convince the investors to go for it with us. And we do really believe in this concept. We really, really do. I think I had a Christmas break. I got a sort of breath of fresh air, and we decided to move forward, recruit our head of sales to help take us to Sephora, who's now our general manager, and go. And then I got, obviously a shot in the arm when Sephora said yes, and everything, was great. I think I hit another moment right before COVID, though. I mean, I know I did. It was just, I was on the road every week. You and I were talking about this. I have kids who are now teens who arguably need me even more than they did when they were in junior high school. Things were going off the rails a little bit there, as they do with teens. And I was just not here, and then I would come home from these trips and be exhausted, and everyone would be sort of, all over me, like, where have you been? My husband, my kids, my dogs, everybody wanted a piece of me, which I totally understood. And I needed a piece of me too. So there was a moment right before COVID where I really thought, I don't know how I'm going to push through. Like, how am I going to push through?
And so you mentioned the exhaustion, which is one of, we talk a lot about burnout on this podcast. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to interview you, because I like interviewing real women. And the truth is, in my opinion anyway, and some people have kind of pushed back on this when I've said this before, but in my opinion, as somebody who worked, in a pretty high pressure work environment as a corporate lawyer in Calgary for 12 years and a partner for the last 5, it is pretty impossible for women to have it all. It is pretty impossible to be the best mom and be the best business person or employee or, whatever, and be the best daughter and the best sister and the best friend and the best, all of that. And, I think it's important that we share our stories around this. I mean, success in one area very often looks like not so much success in another area. I mean, I think that's part of the journey as busy women. And I wonder how you feel about that. Do you agree or disagree with me as I say that? Now I'm like, oh boy, I hope she agrees as I say that.
I disagreed. I 100% agree. I 100% agree. And I wish it weren't the case. And I would like to be able to say that it is possible. I think in certain constructs, maybe it is, if your husband or your partner, or maybe you don't have a partner and therefore you don't have that sort of added, demand on your time. But if you have someone who is equally sort of really 50-50 and everything and really supportive, or is stay at home and is the one sort of focused on the kids, I think maybe you can find more balance. I still think it's hard, but I do believe that things definitely are sacrificed when you move sort of in a direction like a freight train. Like if you're going to go for something, whether it's, your school or your career, or it's very hard to have everything else sort of be in balance. I mean, it
Yeah, I
is. I
mean,
have a
yeah. Sorry, I was going to say there's always a trade-off. I don't think there's any way to do it without a trade-off, but maybe the key to it is, how you define success and what, in terms of like, what is it? What does it mean to me to have it all? What does that actually mean to me? Because I do think you can do a lot of things really well if that's what you want. But I don't think you can do one thing all the time and be the absolute best at that and be the best at everything else too. That's
I
kind
totally agree.
of,
I agree.
yeah.
Yeah. I think it is. You can do a few things well, and you have to just be realistic about, to your point, how many things you can do well and how well you can do each of those things as well.
Yeah.
Um, I have a former colleague who's now a neighbor of mine who's got little kids, and she's, I think, just 30, 31, and she wants to start a business. She's starting a business, and she asked me, so what can I expect? And I just said, well, just kind of brace yourself, and you've got to kind of go in with your structure in place and understand sort of where you have to push back on the demands of the business. And she has a business partner, which is great. I think that's helpful. She's an equal partner. So they both have little kids. So hopefully they can balance that. And they both got spouses who were really supportive. And one is a former entrepreneur and has a lot of time now. So I'm hoping they can make it work. But I said, the big watch out is, I missed 5 years of my kids' lives. I mean, really. And I can't ever get that back. And I would do it differently if I could go back now with the perspective I have, and just watch out for that, because they're too precious. They're just too precious. And your time with them, as you and I were just saying, we only have a couple more years with them until they're off and they're adults and they're launched. And I don't want to waste another minute of that time.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear what you're saying, but I think the value in that, I can't help being a coach here, Amy. I think the value in that for you is that you probably would not recognize the potential and power you have right now to impact them, and the importance of being there and being present if you hadn't had those years where you weren't. Sometimes it takes that lesson for us to really appreciate that. So, the upside of it is that you did go through that, and you learned from that process, and now you're able to use that as you parent going forward. And I'm sure your kids are benefiting from that, right now as you're home. I want to talk about the burnout because I want to talk about, we talk about burnout a lot on here. And you mentioned one of the big signs of burnout, which is just complete exhaustion. And then, and that's a physical and mental exhaustion usually, which was, again, that came out when you were at that Christmas party and you're standing up at the podium and you just burst into tears, right? So that's just you probably just completely and utterly just spent in terms of your emotional energy, mental energy, and physical energy. Were there any other signs of burnout for you in terms of, what that looked like?
Yeah, I mean, my metabolism was definitely a mess. There was no question. My sleep was disrupted, and I was drinking too much. I mean, I look back now because I'm not drinking really right now. Maybe one glass of wine a week, maybe. And I can't actually fathom how I did it. I mean, I was having like 2 G&Ts a night sometimes. And again, no judgment. It just, for me, it wasn't helping. It was just the confluence of not sleeping well, my metabolism being all messed up, and then the alcohol was just not helpful in managing that stress at all.
What's your experience been? I'm just curious because I'm also an alcohol coach.
Yeah.
And first of all, like I applaud that just as a positive wellness choice. What a great thing to just make the decision to not drink as much because you realize it's not serving you anymore. And for whatever reason, it's hard to give ourselves permission to do that, because for a lot of us, it feels like you're admitting that you have some kind of a problem, which I think is, to be honest, completely beside the point. I don't think we need to go into that whole label, assignment place when it comes to alcohol. And I just love the fact when I meet people who just make a positive choice and just say, look, it's not doing me any favors. What was your experience like? What's your experience been like as somebody who doesn't drink like you used to drink? Like, how has it changed your life? What have you noticed about that?
Well, I think because I don't go out much, I probably haven't noticed that much yet. It'll be interesting when things start opening up and people start having parties again, if I do drink more, or how I respond and react. But yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, we've had a few people over for dinner, and we've obviously had the holidays, etc. And it's been really nice. I feel more, I mean, I know it's cliche, but I feel more present. I feel more connected to the experience of being at dinner with 3 or 4 people, or having, a holiday with my kids and my family. I feel like before I was always sort of calculating, what time is too early to have a glass of wine? When are we going to pop the champagne? Or um, and now it's just not part of my experience. I don't know. It just seems, I feel more clear. I feel more connected. I mean, my kids have noticed it, which is interesting. I mean, they didn't like, because I would have a couple glasses of wine and then I was like, I can't drive you anywhere. It was just like from 6 o'clock on, I was kind of, you know, probably not, I was probably a little grouchier too when I was drinking. And so they notice it, and they're really happy that I'm not drinking anymore. They're probably drinking now, but that's another story.
A whole other story. I know. As our kids are really close in age. I have a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old, and actually our kids went to camp at least one summer together. And your kids are, Izzy just turned 18?
17. Yeah, 17 and 15.
17 and 15. Yeah. So
Yeah.
our kids are basically the same ages. So I hear you and feel you on that. That's one of the things I would say is like an unexpected gift of becoming alcohol free for me, is that I can drive my kids anywhere, anytime. Not that I necessarily want to do it at any time, but I do like being available. And I actually really celebrate that when, I've had moments out driving in my car thinking like, I would not have been doing this 3 years ago. I would not have been out at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, picking somebody up from somewhere.
It's weird, isn't it? I mean, in a way, it's like the small things that are so important, especially with teens. If they call you and they need you, you got to go.
Yeah.
And my son plays hockey. He's got games at 9:30 at night. And it doesn't cross my mind that, to your point, a year and a half ago, I don't know who would have been driving him, because it certainly wouldn't have been me. Even after one glass of wine, I wasn't going to get behind the wheel. So
Yeah.
it does, like, gives you more space. It gives you more sort of like freedom and flexibility to live your life in a weird
for
way.
sure. More physical. I hear that all the time from the women I work with. More physical time and more mental time, just less time thinking about drinking. It just becomes a non-factor and you just kind of live your life without it. And it's amazing when you reflect back, how much time that was consuming. I'm the same as you. I mean, if I did have to drive them late, I'd always moved into resentment around that. I was always like, ugh, I can't have a glass of wine until I get this kid home from, X activity on a Friday night. And I never liked that. And now I think, I harbor still a little teeny tiny bit of shame around that. I should never have felt that way. But I think we all know how I feel about shame as a coach. So I'm going to let that go. But I still think about that. And it's just so nice to not have any of those feelings anymore and to just be kind of free. So thanks for sharing that. I think it's nice for people to hear, like, you can just make the decision to drink less. That's totally okay. You can always make that choice. It doesn't mean anything except that you're doing something nice for yourself.
Yeah.
And
there's an odd night to have 2 glasses of champagne or 3 even, and I just don't feel very good the next day. And I'm like, nope, wasn't worth it. Not gonna do it for a while.
Yeah. Now you said, okay, so you had 2 kind of brushes with burnout. I'm going to be kind and call them brushes. And I'm not sure they were brushes, Amy,
Well,
but
I think I was in the ditch and I crawled back out.
yeah, the first time you managed to make it through after a Christmas break, where you were able to kind of get at least enough juice back in your tank to keep going for another however many months or years after that. And then the second time was right before COVID. Are you still feeling burnt out? And if not, how did you get out of it?
No, I feel great now. I think, again, I hate to point to COVID as a blessing, because of course, a pandemic is not a blessing, period. But in terms of it allowing me to stay put and be home, it's been a huge blessing in that regard, just to be with my kids and to kind of reconnect with them and get to know them, because I didn't really have time to actually have meaningful conversations before. To get to sleep at a regular time every night, not be traveling, till 1 a.m. to the next location, sleep in my own bed, exercise on my Peloton bike. It's really allowed me to just get my center back. And now I feel great. I will never travel the way I traveled ever again as long as I live. I just won't do it. Just not necessary. And it was just debilitating for me as personally. But I just, having this time has been really, really nice. I've totally nested. I mean, I don't really have any interest in going anywhere, which is a whole nother thing, but I love it. I love my office is right next to the front door, and I see them when they come home from school. And if I'm on a meeting or not, I'm like, hi, how was your day? I mean, it's just so nice. It's like I'm a stay-at-home mom, but I also have a career just by virtue of being physically in the house. It's nice.
And of course, that's like you and I are in a really, I mean, we are the people for whom there might actually be some upside to being home because our kids are old enough that they're taking care of themselves. And I think we had a conversation about this in our pre-interview too. We don't want to make it sound like this is a great situation for all working parents, because it's obviously not. But if you're parents of teens who have gotten to that place where they're largely self-sufficient, the upside of the downside for me, and I think you feel the same way, Amy, is that I kind of got an unexpected chunk of time with my kids. I thought they were already gone. Like I was almost grieving that last year, the fact that, not last year, I guess the year before that, before this pandemic, I was thinking, okay, they're in high school and now they're gone. Like they're off with their friends constantly. They're never home. They're super busy. They're working. They're, all of this stuff. And in a couple of years, they'll be completely gone. And for me and you too, I guess, because your kids are so close in age, like mine are both going to be gone the same year. They're in the same grade. So they will both be gone in a year and a half. And wow. I was really grieving that in advance. I was already thinking about how that was going to leave such a void for me. And the upside of the downside of this pandemic for me has been that I got time with my kids that feels like a complete gift to me that I did not anticipate getting with them. And of course, I've been busy. This has been one of my busiest years yet in terms of my own business that I run, but same thing. I'm home. Like when they come home, I'm home. I see them. And also, a lot of these activities have been canceled for them. So they're around more at night, and it feels like I'm around, they're around, and yeah, they don't want to spend all of their moments with me, but it does feel like it feels like a real gift to me, that I have this gift of time with them that otherwise would not have happened for me.
Absolutely. But I hear you though, I have quite a few colleagues with little ones. Mm-hmm. That's a whole different story. That's challenging when you're working and you have little ones and daycare isn't open, school's not open. It's different, but having teens is, it's nice to just physically be present, because as much as they say they don't need you or want you, they really, I think, do. We have this app called Life 360, which they tease me about, that shows me not only where they are, but how they got there, if they drove, how fast they drove. I mean, it's like a total
app. I need that app.
Yeah. It's great because they, look on their app and they're like, oh, she's home. I'm going to call her and see if she can pick me up. Oh, she's home. I'm going to, call her and see if I can bring some friends home. And I think there's a comfort in that.
Yeah.
I'm always here, and we're lucky. We have jobs where we can work from home. Obviously there are people that don't, healthcare workers and, people that are working that have to be on site. It's a totally different animal, but
of course. And I think this is the place where, for me, I don't know whether you have ever practiced gratitude, but it's a huge piece of my base for resiliency as a human being. And I've been doing it now for several years. And this is the year that I have, some of the most horrible stuff possible has happened this year, not to me personally, but to the world globally and to other people. And I'm well aware of that. But in terms of my own personal life, I have found more things to be grateful for this year than I ever thought possible in this very weird time that we're all trying to get through.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So I have a question for you around, because you employ a lot of people, right?
Yeah, I think there's 22 of us, and with contractors, probably about 25.
Yeah. So, and I'm just from what I know, many of them are women.
All of them except one.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I didn't want to prejudge it, but I was thinking to myself, I know a lot of them, and I think they're mostly women. So this is a question that I was thinking about after we had our pre-interview. You and I were talking about, and maybe we'll start here. Like, you were talking about how you want to prevent burnout going forward. And I had asked you, what are you going to do to ensure that this doesn't happen again, that you don't find yourself back in the same situation, feeling some of those regrets, again, around work-life balance. And you had an answer for that. So why don't you give me that answer first?
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember what I said to you at the time, so hopefully I'm consistent, but
Okay.
I think for me, it's really boundaries. I'm lucky in that I'm the boss, quote unquote. So in that sense, I'm more empowered to create my own boundaries. And I don't think I've ever given myself license to do it in the past. I think I've got a pretty sort of I've got a big guilt complex, and I've always been a really hard worker, and I just don't feel worthy. It's like, nope, I'm the boss and I've got to make this work, and I've got to just, carry the load on my shoulders. But the reality is I'm not going to be a good boss or colleague if I'm exhausted and burnt out. And so it's actually my responsibility to draw some boundaries and to say, nope, this is, the time that I need for myself in order for me to be a better boss. So I've made a change in my calendar where actually in the mornings I don't have any meetings. I don't start meetings until 11 a.m. Atlantic. And part of that's because we have a whole team in California. So I'm usually working a little later. So meetings start at 11. So I'll usually have meetings from like 11 to 6 or 11 to 7. And I need that couple of hours in the morning to just get my own stuff done or write or think or go for a walk. Even sometimes I do my Peloton at that time of the day. I'm allowing myself that time. Of course, I get up first thing and that's when I'm most fresh, and I usually hit the email at 7. I know it's not a great thing to do, but it's when I'm most fresh. So I have already worked a couple hours before I drop the kids at school, and then I have this time to like get my feet under me and stuff like that, and the team has been totally understanding. They're like, no problem, totally get it, that's cool, that's great, fill your boots. Like,
Isn't that amazing? I mean, I think that's something to like focus on a little bit, because I do tons of work in corporate wellness. I talk to teams of people a lot. I do, presentations to huge groups of people sometimes. And I talk a lot about this idea of boundaries and how boundaries really are like learning how to say no, learning how to set boundaries that actually serve you is the antidote to burnout. It's the way to prevent burnout. The reason why women get themselves to a place of burnout is because we just say yes to far too much stuff. But it's always, and the pushback I get a lot of the time from employees is, I can't do that. If I do that, there are going to be repercussions for me. My employer's not going to like that. My manager's going to get on me. I'm going to look like a failure. I'm not going to rise as quickly as I want to rise in this company. I'm putting my career in jeopardy. I need to say yes to all these things. I need to do all of this stuff. And it's so interesting to me that when they actually, and my response to that, by the way, is go talk to your manager, go talk to your HR person, go talk to your boss, because my guess is that is not the case at all. And they actually want more than anything to keep you functioning as a really efficient, happy employee so that you can avoid burnout and keep working for them, because you're an asset to them right now. And so I challenge them to go talk to their, whoever their supervisors are, and have that conversation. And the answer is always, yes, do that. Set the boundaries, take the time. This is what we want. And you're such a great example of that. I mean, as an entrepreneur and as the boss of the company, you got to do that for yourself, because you got nobody to answer to, I guess, except yourself. So I think that's fascinating that was kind of the key for you is setting those boundaries, which leads me to the next question, which is how I got off on this tangent with you, which is, as the employer of these 22 people, 21 of whom are women, not that the guy doesn't count, by the way. I'm very concerned about his balance as well. But as the employer of those women, what have you learned through the course of your own burnout and through your kind of recovery from that during this last year, in terms of balance and what's important? And, how's that going to translate in terms of, you may not have thought about this, so I'm probably putting you on the spot a little bit, but you think it's going to impact how you run the company and how you manage your own employees?
Definitely. I mean, the one thing about this experience is, first of all, I was very anti-work from home, which is funny. And I'm sure Kara and others will laugh, because I just was maniacal about, we need FaceTime. We need to be together. We need to interact. It's so important to see each other face to face. And funnily enough, even though we had the ability to do video calls, we never did. We were always on the phone. So it was on the phone or face to face. And I just felt like that face to face was so important. And I'd worked in marketing for so long. I was like, it's cross-functional teamwork. It's so important that operations and finance and marketing, everyone's in the same room. And then and there was a lot of pushback, because the people that, commuting, they're like, I'm wasting an hour and a half to get here and get home. I could be working. I could be spending time with my family. This is really dumb. Why do we have an office? And then this happened. It was like the universe said, and you will have no office. And I love it, and they love it. and we're all, we're all missing each other in the physical proximity. But I think soon enough we'll be able to gather more often and have meetings face to face, but most of our team is remote anyway. So, but video has really been a good proxy, although I do get tired of the screen time after a while. But it's also, been interesting because a lot of my team have not had any childcare too, or school, and so there is a need to organize our days around nap schedules in some cases, school schedules in some cases, because they're sharing the responsibility with their spouse of like, you've got these hours of the school, because we're all overseeing homeschooling for the little ones.
Mhm.
And now doctor's appointments or whatever comes up, and where before, there might have been a little bit of like, well, can't you organize that, before work hours or after work hours? I think I not intentionally, but had a very sort of corporate mindset that like, if there's an appointment that takes over an hour, you need to take a half day and all this shenanigans. And now I'm just like, why does it matter? Does it matter? Everything's working beautifully, and actually we're more successful than we've ever been as a company. And I truly believe that I believe in energy, and I believe in, the energy put out in the world, and the energy of all of the employees and the energy of this business is palpable. Like I think it's just changed my mindset. I think I was just caught up over stupid things that don't matter and that
Yeah.
don't make a difference. And that attitude actually diminished productivity.
Yeah.
Instead of encouraged it.
I could be completely off here, but it's never stopped me before. So I'm going to say this. It feels like a lot of those old constructs that you were stuck in maybe are a little rooted in kind of a patriarchal system of business, and kind of something that maybe serves our male counterparts a little better than it naturally serves women. And I think one of the, again, a little silver lining in this whole experience we've had with the pandemic and having to start working from home all the time and getting, familiar with this technology, is that it's providing us with some evidence that there is a way to do this differently. And I think that way of doing it differently, again, there are lots of drawbacks with it, but I think there are a lot of positives in it too, in terms of flexibility in the workplace and how we go forward. And yeah, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this myself, just in terms of the efficiencies of doing things the way we're doing them, the impact it's going to have on the planet for everybody not to be traveling the same amount of time.
And I agree with you. I mean, I'm sort of raging against the patriarchy. I'm just in that sort of headspace at the minute. But it's true. And that's sort of the construct that I was raised in and the way that I was treated. And it wasn't, I don't think, conscious for me to be like, well, that's the way it has to be. It was sort of subconscious and sort of in my being, that it was like, listen, a workday has to be structured a certain way in order for it to be workable. And it's just dumb. I mean, I look back now and I'm like, whoa, like you were so hung up on stuff that actually made your life really difficult. Because I worked actually for a couple of years before starting Skinfix, and it was the only work experience I had with young children, working for somebody else, not myself. And they were horrible to me. They were horrible to me about, when I had to be at work, and I was constantly stressed about the drop off and the pickup and the this and the that, and God forbid the doctor's appointments, God forbid the snow days. So why would I think that that was a good structure to carry forward into any company? I don't know. It's not that we've always been very, very flexible about, kids have always been in and out of our office, and about snow days and, doctor's appointments and stuff. But I still had a little bit more of a rigid construct than needed to be the case. And it was just so dumb.
Yeah, I know. It's funny. Sometimes it just takes you just have to take something off the table for you to realize you actually didn't need it in the first place. And I think that that's what COVID has done around a lot of these practices that we took to be kind of the gospel and the way to do it. So that's interesting. So I assume, going back to that question I asked you about how you're going to go forward post pandemic, that there will be some changes just generally in terms of how you think and manage, and your expectations. I don't want to pin you into anything with your employees, but just in terms of your expectations around what a really efficient, positive, productive workplace looks like.
Yeah, I mean, it's just changed. It's changed our mindset about everything, just because we've had to be really flexible with one another, and everyone is really understanding. The other night someone asked for a meeting with us. It was a finance guy in LA who's working with us, and he asked for a meeting that was going to effectively be from 6 to 8 p.m. Atlantic. And one of my colleagues has 3 young kids. And I said, that time will never work for us. I mean, it's just not going to work. It's not that we don't work a lot when we need to, and we were not, willing to do an evening or a weekend when we need to. I mean, we're in a, fast growth phase. But if there's a way around it, that is precious time. Those 2 hours are when she's going to be having dinner and doing baths and putting kids to bed. And I'm not going to ask her to be on a conference call. So yeah, it's just completely changing our headset and not being afraid to say, nope, those hours are never going to work. Like, block those out. I mean, our head of finance has 2 little kids and his wife works full time, and he's on PST, which is already a bit of a challenge because he's 4 hours behind us. But there were a couple hours every day where he's like, I'm on duty these 2 hours. I mean, his kids are like 2 and 3. It's like, no problem, and sometimes it wasn't so convenient because it was like, oh, okay, well, that means we're going to have a meeting at 5 every Thursday night. But it's just about being compassionate, understanding. It's really about true teamwork now. It's like a totally different animal because we're working not just together on a business, but we're working together to kind of help manage around people's realities in their life and their personal lives. I don't know. It's really good. It's just about, let's be flexible. Let's figure out what works, and let's just get the job done.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, I can see how that will happen for sure with you because you've had your own personal experience with this, and you've learned, it sounds like you've learned a lot over the last couple of years around how you want to do things and what works for you personally. And I think you can see clearly how that would translate to other women's lives, especially in terms of what might work better for them. But it'll be interesting to see what happens in the more male dominated sectors and in those businesses that are still run, largely by men. But I'll tell you, from the corporate wellness work that I'm doing, what I'm hearing is that this is this is not just your company that is learning this kind of stuff. And the corporations that I've been working with are saying things like, we anticipate that we will have far more remote workplace stuff happening going into the future. Even when we are able to gather again, we're not sure how much of the old paradigm we're going to go back to. So I feel like there is probably going to be quite a global shift in terms of how we do business and how we work going forward.
It's been really interesting because my husband is definitely a product of the patriarchy for sure. And he has, 18 portfolio businesses that he is invested in, and every single one of them has a male CEO. And for the most part, a predominantly male. Actually, sorry, there's one other that has a female CEO. I misspeak, but predominantly male management teams and historically predominantly male CEOs. And I would say to him, like, do you realize that women often in the workplace are also managing, not in every case, but in a lot of cases, their kids' doctor's appointments and their kids' sports and their kids and the meals and the but it does in addition to, and he's sort of like, yeah. But now he's actually seen it. He sees what's going on. He sees me running the kids to their activities and running them back and forth to their doctor's appointments and then jumping on Zoom or being on Zoom while I'm driving them. And I think it's been interesting for him to watch, because it's definitely, there's definitely more on my plate than is on the plates of 90% of the men that he works with, period. And it's hopefully been enlightening for him. And hopefully as he works with more female CEOs, he'll be more compassionate about that as well, because it's, we still are doing our second shift or third shift in many cases.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's happening across the globe. I think, the men in positions of power and just men generally are starting to recognize it's right there in front of them every day. The second shift and the third shift, as you said, which many of us are doing now with homeschooling and managing all these extra responsibilities that we weren't managing before this pandemic. I think men are seeing that, and I hope that leads to a shift. And I think, as with everything, the bottom line is money, and I think the efficiency in this, from a financial perspective, is also pretty apparent for a lot of companies. I mean, there's value to doing things face to face sometimes, but there's a lot of money to be saved and time to be saved, and not traveling constantly as well, which is something that I think you've learned over the course of
Oh
this.
my gosh. I mean, even just, I have my own podcast that we did one season. We're hoping to do another season. And I was flying all over the place to sit face to face with derms and functional medical practitioners. What was I doing? Like thousands of dollars, not to mention days away from my family. Dumb, like dumb.
Take it from a Zoom podcaster, Amy. It's not required.
No. And we did Zoom for the end because we had to. And it's like, well, and I've been on a couple of Zoom podcasts. I mean, it's just, we were doing dumb things. I mean, Sephora, we was sort of a command performance. There were meetings and there were certain events. And obviously there will be events that we need to be at to train BAs, et cetera. They don't want us there for the meetings. They don't want us. It's all Zoom. And I don't think that will change. I mean, probably once a year I'll fly out to take our buyer to dinner and see her face to face and give her a hug. But otherwise it's like, Zoomaluma, guys, we don't have time for this.
Yeah. You know what? And my hope is, for so many of the women out there who are, approaching burnout, like where you were pre-pandemic, my hope is that, and I know that burnout rates are on the rise right now because this second and third shift is so hard for us as women. And again, I'm not saying it's not hard for men, but there is an additional level of pressure on many women that was not there before this pandemic. So that is why rates are climbing right now, not going down. And you're definitely, as we've talked about before, you and I are the exception in the fact that our kids are old enough that they can take care of themselves. And so we don't have as many of those extra responsibilities right now. And for us, it actually might be a bit of an opportunity to take a break. I'm putting that in air quotes. But for so many, that's not the case. My hope though, is that post-pandemic, things don't go back to normal. And we learn from this, and we're able to take the pieces that worked better for us and keep them in place and let go of the things that were not working for us before. And my hope is that that actually creates a framework that will help to reduce overall rates of burnout for women. That is my hope after this pandemic. And you're giving me hope of that because you're talking about how how this is going to impact how you go forward as an employer and as a company.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just given me perspective, on how important it is to get rest and get exercise and see our families and reboot and plug in and understand that life is so much more than just our job. Even if it is our business, there is so much more going on, and that the business will do better as a result. I mean, we have the direct evidence to show that our business has exploded during a period when we have not been working under the normal constructs.
You're right. Yeah. It's a great example of what happens when you're forced to think outside of the box. And I was just doing a podcast, I can't remember which one it was. I recorded one and it was either the one I did this morning or the one I did yesterday, where I was talking about how panicked I was at the beginning of this whole thing, how completely, and my guess is you were feeling panicked too. I was like, how is this going to work? How am I going to take this business that I had just started the process of throwing myself into this really full time. I'd made that decision when my kids started high school. Okay, now I'm going to get back to working full time, and this is the time for me, and I'm going to try to be creative with this business, and I want to do all these new things, this podcast included. But when that first lockdown started, I had a moment of complete terror where I was like, how am I going to make this work? How's this going to happen? And the end product of it was, women are really great at creativity and problem solving. Like it's a skill set that we have. And I think I surprised myself in terms of what I was able to do this year. And again, there were some real gifts in this whole thing. And I'm going to try to take those lessons that I learned this year and carry them forward. I was looking at, you're going to kill me for this. I don't even know where I found this. It was in my file because you and I have been meaning to do this podcast for a long time. And I did some, whenever we first talked about it, I did some research on you and I threw it in a file. And then this morning I was looking at it.
Oh my gosh, I'm scared, Wendy.
Oh no. No, I'm just going to ask you.
Skeletons.
No, they're not skeletons. I just had a couple of questions because you were talking about an article you were interviewed for an article somewhere and I printed it out. But one of the things you were talking about is the value of mistakes. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because this is a huge piece of my coaching model. So I talk all the time with my clients about the importance of recharacterizing failures and mistakes, and um, and actually using different language around it. The This Naked Mind um, methodology that I just got certified in last year, this is a big piece of that. It's about talking about mistakes and failures as data points instead of as mistakes and failures. So really starting to look at them as an opportunity to learn instead of as a failure or something that shouldn't have happened. And I was reading this article, and it doesn't matter if you don't remember it, but you were talking about the value of mistakes, and it resonated with me because it sounded a lot like what I'm talking about now. Um, can you speak to that? You know,
Yeah. God, there have been so many mistakes. I mean, if as I said, if I could go back and do it over, I would do it so differently. But I suppose in a lot of ways, I mean, I know those mistakes have informed me on levels beyond just business, just personally, they've been really valuable. Some of them have been really expensive and really time consuming, but they, ultimately are always valuable. And I think people should talk more about their mistakes, because we often, when we talk to business people who, maybe eventually have a success, it's all about all the great things that happen. I don't know that we talk enough about the things we did that were absolutely wrong. But I had a lot of entrepreneurs along the way grab me and say, I did this. This is what happened. Don't do that. Don't go there. Don't go down that alley.
right.
In some cases, I did it anyway.
Yeah.
And had the same experience they did, or worse. And I do also try to grab as many people as I can and tell them about my data points, so that at least they're informed and they can sort of have their eyes open when they go into a discussion or a situation. But I think it's often hard because you get so tantalized by an opportunity, especially when it's a new retailer who wants to launch you and they're talking about millions of dollars of orders and thousands of stores and millions of customers. And you're like, woo, dreaming in Technicolor. And what you don't understand is that there's a lot of bodies in the graveyard out the back door, brands that came through and did not make it and, spent millions trying to do it. And those brands have valuable data points to share. And I try to do that as much as I can, because we made some stupid mistakes. I made some stupid mistakes and continue to, sadly, but
well, that's part of, you're being human, really. That's just part of being human. And I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, because I think it's really important to do that in the context of business and, business development, to learn from your mistakes and to share your mistakes with others. I think it's especially important to share those stories with other women entrepreneurs, because we need to give each other a leg up whenever we can. But I also think it's really, really important to talk about that in the context of our personal growth. And so the data points we've had in our own life in terms of things that have happened that we look back on now and we think, well, that could have gone better. But the things that we learn from that allow us to actually grow and do better as we go forward. And I'm just wondering, as we kind of wrap up this podcast episode, are there some data points that you've had personally that, allow you to actually share some sage advice here?
Yeah, I mean, so many data points personally. I think the biggest one for me is one that we talked about a little earlier, which is that, for me, my children and my time with my children is such a finite, beautiful experience in my life that I would have drawn more boundaries around that if I were to go back. And I think, it was what I was trying to communicate to my friend, is just know going in that there is the potential for this thing to consume you and for you to miss out on the time with them. And that doesn't mean that you still don't have a career for yourself that gives you fulfillment, but just know going in that this has been my experience and I wish I had done it differently. And it has impacted all of us in a negative way, which is now turned into a positive, to your point about data points. But looking back now, I realized that period was really tender and precarious. They'd already been through a divorce, and then their mom started a company. I wouldn't do that exactly the way I did that again. I would have set myself up to have more support going in so that I could spend more time with them. I would have just said no to a lot of things that I said yes to because I thought I had to, and they thought they were going to make the difference, and they didn't make a difference. That's I think for me, that's been the most important data point. And again, you talk about shame and regret and all these things that are not fruitful emotions. And so I try to really meditate on it happened. It was their experience. It's my experience. And we've all learned from it. And I'm very close with my children and I get great time with them now. And it was part of our lived experience. So I try not to look back at it with shame and regret because I have to kind of move forward and learn from it. But there are lots of lessons there, human connections. We're so lucky and blessed to have children in our lives, to be moms. And suck it up, suck it up and spend every minute you can with them. Yeah. We all have to work and we all have to, make a living wage. And so I get that it's not possible for us all to be with them all the time. And they probably wouldn't want that anyway, but I certainly would have drawn more boundaries around the time with them.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being so honest today too. I think it's going to be really helpful for other people who are listening and feeling like they've got some areas that they don't love in their life that they like to make change around. And I do want to say this in relation to what you were just saying. I think, it is important to spend time with your kids, but what really matters is the quality of the time that you are spending with them. And so this is where taking time to take care of yourself comes in, because if you're not taking care of yourself, the time that you spend with your kids will not be as valuable as it could be. It will not be as impactful for them. You won't enjoy it as much. They won't enjoy it as much. This is that whole put your own oxygen mask on first. Like, take care of yourself because you cannot pour from an empty cup. And your story today is, a really great example of what happens when you don't take care of yourself and you don't set boundaries, and, you get to a place where you're having a hard time helping anybody else out, which is, I think, where you were before COVID this year. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thanks for agreeing to come on the podcast. I know how busy you are, and thank you so much for being so honest and sharing your story with me today. I have loved having you here as a guest.
Oh, thank you, Wendy. I've loved being here. I'd love to talk to you and hope to see you soon.
Yes. Thanks, Amy. Bye.
Bye. Take care.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. Ready to create a life you don't want to escape from? Download your free Blueprint for Change now. This incredible workbook includes some of my favorite coaching tools and will help you get clear on what you need more and less of in your life. Grab it at www.wendymccallum.com/blueprint. That's www.wendymccallum.com/blueprint.